All right, so get this. A guy takes down a lion with his bare hands, no weapons, no help, just him and a lion.
Sounds like a scene straight out of a movie.
Right. And then it gets better. This same guy, he grabs a donkey's jawbone.
A jawbone.
Yeah, a jawbone, and uses it to fight off an entire army. You'd think we were about to break down the latest action flick, but this is no summer blockbuster. This is the story of Samson.
Samson, yeah, the name definitely rings a bell. Strong guy, right?
Strong doesn't even begin to cover it. We're talking superhuman strength, a life full of drama, intrigue, divine intervention, you name it. And it all goes down against the backdrop of ancient Israel under Philistine rule.
So we're talking biblical history here.
Exactly. We're diving deep into the Book of Judges, along with a whole stack of other sources on ancient Israelite vows and traditions. Because, let's be real, Samson's story, it's more than just muscles and miracles. It's about destiny, temptation, and the struggle between our human desires and a higher calling.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, because on the surface, you've got this almost mythical figure known for incredible feats of strength. But when you dig a little deeper, you realize there's a lot more to Samson than meets the eye.
Absolutely. It's a story that's been told and retold for centuries, and for good reason. Because underneath all the action, it grapples with some pretty timeless questions about faith, free will, and what it means to be chosen for something greater than yourself.
Sounds intense. So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, it all starts, as these stories often do, with a rather unusual birth.
Unusual how?
Imagine this. Samson's parents, they couldn't have children, and then one day, an angel appears before them.
Talk about a surprise visitor.
Right, and this angel, he delivers a prophecy, tells them that they will have a son who will begin to free Israel from the Philistines, but, and this is a big but, their son has to live as a Nazirite.
Okay, so time for a little history lesson.
Yeah.
For those of us who might not be up on our ancient Israelite vows, what exactly does it mean to be a Nazirite?
It's more than just skipping a few haircuts. It was a vow of serious dedication. Think of it as a way of setting yourself apart, demonstrating your commitment to God.
And how did that play out in everyday life?
Well, there were a few key rules involved. First, no wine, no fermented drinks, no grapes at all, actually. Second, no haircuts whatsoever. The hair was seen as a symbol of the sacred vow, so it was allowed to grow long and untouched.
Okay, so no wine and no haircuts. What else?
And lastly, no contact with anything dead. No touching corpses, no going to funerals, nothing that would be considered ritually impure.
So it's pretty strict.
It was. But these rules weren't arbitrary. They were all about cultivating a state of ritual purity, a way of drawing closer to God. And the belief was that this closeness to God was the source of Samson's extraordinary strength.
So it wasn't just about physical strength, but spiritual strength as well.
Exactly. And you can see that theme woven throughout the entire story. Take, for instance, the angel that appeared to Samson's parents. He didn't just show up once, he appeared twice. Both times, emphasizing the importance of this Nazirite vow. Imagine being Samson's parents. You've longed for a child, and now you are told he will be special.
Touched by the divine, chosen to deliver Israel. But also bound by these really specific, really strict rules. Talk about pressure.
And can you imagine the impact those events must have had on young Samson? Knowing from childhood that your life has a purpose, a destiny, that you are literally set apart, it makes you wonder how he handled that kind of pressure, knowing what he was destined to do.
Right. Because it's one thing to be told you're special, but then it's another thing entirely to live up to those expectations, especially when your destiny is so closely intertwined with your relationship with God.
And that's what makes Samson such a fascinating and relatable figure. He's this larger-than-life character, capable of unbelievable feats, but he's also deeply human, full of flaws and contradictions. He struggles with temptation, he makes mistakes, he experiences both incredible highs and devastating lows.
It sounds like he was kind of a walking paradox.
In a way, he was, but that's what makes his story so compelling. He wasn't a perfect hero. He was a man trying to find his way, torn between his desires and his duty, his humanity, and his divine calling.
So we had this picture of Samson growing up, bound by this Nazirite vow, knowing that he's destined for greatness. But how does this seemingly invincible warrior, chosen by God, end up falling for a Philistine woman? It seems a little out of character, wouldn't you say?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting. Remember, we're talking about a time when the Israelites and the Philistines were bitter enemies. So for Samson to fall in love with a Philistine woman, that wasn't just a forbidden romance, it was a recipe for disaster. Talk about a recipe for disaster. You've got this hero, chosen by God, bound by a sacred vow, and he falls head over heels for the enemy's daughter. It's like something out of a Shakespearean tragedy, but with a biblical twist.
And you know it's not going to end well, especially when you consider the cultural context. This isn't just about young love, it's about deep-seated animosity between two nations, generations of conflict and mistrust.
So, Samson is walking a tightrope here, caught between his heart and his duty, his human desires and his divine calling. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, for starters, the Philistines, they weren't exactly known for their fair play. Remember that riddle contest at the wedding feast?
Oh, yeah, the one where Samson, he's feeling pretty confident, challenges the Philistines with a riddle inspired by, of all things, a dead lion.
Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Not exactly child's play.
No, not at all. But the Philistines, instead of racking their brains for the answer, they take a shortcut. A rather sneaky shortcut, I might add.
They threaten his new bride, forcing her to wheedle the answer out of Samson. Talk about a breach of trust.
And Samson, well, let's just say he doesn't handle it well.
He's furious.
Yeah.
And who could blame him? He's been tricked, humiliated, and his trust has been betrayed. But his reaction, let's just say it had consequences.
He goes on a rampage, killing 30 Philistines, taking their belongings, and storming off in a rage, leaving his bride behind. Not exactly the picture-perfect honeymoon.
It's a classic example of how quickly things can escalate, how personal grievances can spiral out of control and fuel larger conflicts.
And that's precisely what happens here. It's a cycle of revenge, with each act of violence begetting another. It's a pattern that we see throughout history, and sadly, it's still relevant today.
We think we can control the flames of anger and resentment, but often they end up consuming everything in their path.
And that's exactly what happens to Samson and everyone around him. The Philistines, they retaliate by burning down his wife's house, killing both her and her father. Talk about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's a brutal reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked revenge.
And it all stems from this one act of betrayal, this seemingly small act of dishonesty that sets off this chain reaction of violence and destruction.
And Samson, despite his superhuman strength, he's caught right in the middle of it all, a pawn in this deadly game of revenge.
He tries to move on, tries to find some semblance of peace, but the Philistines, they're relentless. They want him captured, they want him neutralized, and they're willing to go to any lengths to make it happen.
So they send Delilah, and this, my friend, is where things get really interesting. It's one of the most famous stories in the Bible, Samson and Delilah. But when you dig into the details, you realize it's not your typical love story.
It's more like a psychological thriller, full of seduction, betrayal, and enough intrigue to keep you on the edge of your seat.
Right. And it all starts with the Philistines. They're desperate. They've seen what Samson can do, the kind of chaos he can unleash with just his bare hands.
So they turn to Delilah.
And not just because she's beautiful.
No, there's more to it than that. She's cunning, she's manipulative, and she's their last hope at stopping Samson.
They offer her a small fortune, a king's ransom, to uncover the secret of his strength. Think about the pressure on her.
Caught between her people who are desperate for her to succeed and this powerful warrior who's stolen her heart or at least captured her attention. It's a recipe for disaster.
And she tries everything, every trick in the book. She asks him outright, "What is the secret of your strength?"
And does Samson spill the beans?
He does not. At least, not at first. He feeds her these elaborate lies, these tall tales about how to weaken him, and she buys it, or at least pretends to.
But the tension is building with every failed attempt. You can almost feel the walls closing in on Samson.
And maybe he starts to believe he can outrun the truth, that he can juggle his double life forever. But secrets have a way of coming out, don't they?
Especially when you're dealing with someone as determined as Delilah.
In the end, she wears him down, chipping away at his resolve, and he cracks. He confesses that his strength lies in his hair, in the sacred vow he took as a Nazirite.
The one thing he swore never to break.
The one thing that connected him to God and gave him that superhuman strength. He lets his guard down, literally, his head resting in her lap as he reveals the truth, and that's when it all comes crashing down.
His hair is shorn, his strength gone. The Philistines seize him, blind him, imprison him. The mighty Samson brought low by a single act of betrayal.
It's a tragic fall from grace, a reminder that even the strongest among us have vulnerabilities. But it's not the end of Samson's story. He may be physically broken, but his spirit, his faith, it's not extinguished.
And that's what makes the ending of this story so powerful, so unforgettable.
Because even in his darkest hour, Samson remembers who he is, who he was always meant to be. He calls upon the Lord one last time, And in a moment of both terrible vengeance and divine justice, he brings the entire temple crashing down, destroying his enemies and himself in one fell swoop.
It's a powerful and, let's be honest, kind of terrifying ending, one that sparked debate for centuries.
Was it an act of selfless sacrifice or reckless revenge? Was he a hero or a cautionary tale?
There are no easy answers with a story like this, and that's what makes it so compelling, because it forces us to confront the complexities of human nature, the struggle between good and evil, faith and doubt, love and betrayal.
And maybe that's the point. Samson's story isn't about perfection. It's about the messy, complicated reality of what it means to be human, to be chosen, to fall, and to rise again.
It's a story that sticks with you, makes you think about the choices we make, the consequences of our actions, and the power of faith, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about retelling an ancient story. It's about wrestling with the same questions that have resonated with humanity for millennia. It's about looking at our own lives, our own struggles, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of Samson in all of us.
We're thrilled to introduce a new book presenting 3 new old Earth theories that provide a clear and logical narrative that harmonizes the biblical account with scientific understanding. Unlike other Genesis theories, these unique theories connect biblical events to real-world occurrences, making them more relatable and meaningful. Find out how in this new book, available on Amazon.com now. On Amazon, search for Resolving Genesis.